So this is 4.3a, one-to-one and inverse functions. And just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea before we get too carried away with the whole inverse function things. An inverse function undoes a regular function. So for example, this has nothing to do with necessarily the lesson, but it just is a reminder of an inverse. So if we have 1/3, the inverse of that means we flip it upside down. Okay? Or if we have 4, the inverse is 1/4. Okay, what I mean it undoes, if I multiply it, I get 1. If I multiply it, I get 1. Okay, so just a little bit of a reminder what an inverse is. Now when we get into some algebraic formulas, it changes a lot from what it looks like. So, like I say, it undoes it. If you look at table 4.8 on page 275, gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're going on, or what's going on. Basically, another way to look at it is g of f of x or f of g of x. So we completely switch those around. They both equal x. So if that's true, if they're an identity function, then we have an inverse. Okay, so if you look at the green box bottom of page 275, they give you kind of a definition of an inverse, and the symbol for an inverse is this. Okay, the key thing to look at is that -1 there. It looks like an f to the -1 power. Actually, whenever it's put on an f, it's called f inverse. Alright, so what we're going to do is learn what to do with these and then learn what to do with one-to-one functions. And I noticed that this college algebra book, since it is mainly focused on social sciences and managerial life, they're not going in as deep mathematically with these functions, which is a good thing for you. So anyway, let's look at some of this and see what we can do. Okay, so example 1, this equation, and notice, again, I've mentioned that y and f of x are the same, and that's just a little bit of a reminder there. So if I want to convert degrees Celsius to degrees Fahrenheit, I use this function. So if I use degrees Celsius to degrees Fahrenheit, whoops, that's not an f. I use that function. Now if I want to go from degrees Fahrenheit to degrees Celsius, I use this function, which that also equals y. And my function is, which means this and this are inverses. Okay, so this top one, I'm going from Celsius to Fahrenheit. I'm putting a C in here. I'm putting a number in here like 30 degrees Celsius and solving it, and I get degrees Fahrenheit. Here I'm putting like 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and that will give me then my degrees in Celsius. Okay, so those are inverse functions, and we'll go into how we know what an inverse function is in just a minute. Okay, so I know that they're inverse functions because this gives me, that should give me x, as well as this should give me x. So if I do this and I get x, and I do this and get x, then they're inverse functions. Now, if you remember how this works from last lesson, I look at my g of x, and I take that whole thing, and whenever there's an x in the top one, in the f of x, I put that in its place. So I'm going to do Okay, I do the math and I find out that equals x. Now this second one here, let's do it in black. Wherever I see an x here, I'm going to put this in its place. Okay, and when I do that and cancel everything and simplify, I find out everything cancels and is equal to x. So since this one, doing it this composition, f of g of x gives me x, and g of f of x gives me x, then I know that it's inverse. Okay? Okay, so this first video had to do with inverse functions. We'll start on the second one that has to do with one-to-one functions.